She saved lives from a burning galley and vanished, scarred and forgotten. 7 years later, the billionaire who left her behind walks into her flower shop and doesn't even recognize her face. But she remembers everything, and this time, he won't leave without facing the truth. The salty breeze from the ocean drifted through the slightly cracked window of the flower shop, carrying with it the quiet rhythm of the seaseed town. Elena Reyes stood behind the counter, her fingers gently wrapping twine around a bouquet of baby's breath and blush roses. Her movements were calm, precise, her silk scarf with right side of her face, the edge tucked behind her ear. Most customers never asked about the scarf. A few newcomers stared too long, then quickly looked away. Locals had grown used to it, like the scent of lavender that lingered permanently in the shop. No one really knew Elena, though everyone admired her work. Her arrangements were stunning, like they carried messages in their petals. But she didn't attend town events or linger in conversation. She kept to herself. At 28, she had carved out a small, safe world of blooms and shadows. On Tuesdays, a polished assistant from one of the coastal firms placed standing flower orders for her boss. Always the same script: white tulips, hydrangeas, and pale green eucalyptus for a corporate lobby. Elena barely looked up when the assistant entered. "Same arrangement?" Elena asked, wrapping the bouquet before receiving an answer. "Yes, please, for Mr. Wolfe," the assistant replied, tapping something into her phone. "He likes when the office smells like spring." Elena nodded. She packaged the bouquet carefully, but something in her chest caressed. No. The name always hit like a dropped stone in still water. She remembered another time, another life. 7 years ago, before the fire. Back then, she was known as Helena Castile. Her world had been ballrooms and violin rehearsals, gala invitations with gold lettering, and the thrill of a secret romance with Adrian Wolfe. They'd met during a charity auction. He had smiled across the crowd, introduced himself with the kind of charm that disarmed every doubt. She had fallen fast, quietly, foolishly. Then came the gala. It was supposed to be the night they told people, the night they danced hand in hand without hiding. But the fire started on the east wing. Smoke, panic screams. She hadn't run. She had turned back, pulled 2 children out through a side door, dragged a woman in heels through the smoke. She didn't remember the explosion, only the searing pain on her right side, the heaviness in her lungs. When she woke up in a hospital, Adrian was gone. No calls, no visits, no flowers. She read his name once, in an article. Wolfe International expanding. A mention of recovery from a recent accident, but nothing more. She changed her name, moved here, bought the flower shop with what little money her parents had left, and built a new life out of broken roots. The bell over the door rang again. Elena turned from the counter, bouquet in hand. A man stepped in. Tall, charcoal suit, clean-shaven jaw, sharp blue eyes that paused on the arrangements, then swept over to her. "Elena Reyes?" he asked, voice cool, professional. Her fingers clenched slightly around the bouquet. "Yes. I'm Adrian Wolfe. I prefer to choose the flowers myself moving forward." For a heartbeat, everything stilled. He was standing 5 feet from her. Her past. Her pain. The man who had vanished into silence. He didn't recognize her. She could have dropped the bouquet, could have run, screamed, wept. But she didn't. Instead, she forced her voice steady. "Of course, Mr. Wolfe," she said, placing the bouquet on the counter. "Would you like to choose the flowers yourself this time?" Adrian stepped closer, scanning the buckets of blooms arranged with care beneath the soft lighting of the shop. Tulips, lilies, ranunculus, all angled like dancers mid-step. Elena stood still behind the counter, heart thudding painfully, praying he wouldn't look too long. The scarf felt tighter than usual, like a ribbon around a secret she'd buried too deep. "I'm looking for something," Adrian said, his fingers grazing the petals of a pale peony. "But I don't know what yet." Elena gave a quiet nod, carefully placing scissors down beside her. "May I ask who the flowers are for? That usually helps." He hesitated, They're not for anyone in particular. I need the office to feel less cold." That surprised her. The Adrian Wolfe she once knew didn't talk about warmth or cold. He talked in acquisitions, targets, and high-rise numbers. He was all business and ambition. But here he was now, eyes scanning petals like a man chasing something he couldn't name. She moved around the counter slowly, not letting him see her right side too clearly. Then perhaps something with scent. Memory lives in fragrance, more than sight. Adrian blinked at her. "You sound like someone who's lost something." She met his gaze. "Don't we all?" There was a flicker in his eyes, like he almost recognized her voice, but then it passed. He shook it off and pointed to the gardenias. They remind me of a woman I once knew. She loved old songs and hated orchids." Elena's breath caught in her throat. He was talking about her. Before the fire, before the name change, before her world collapsed. "I'm sure she had good taste," she said lightly, turning to wrap the bouquet. Adrian leaned against the counter, watching her hands move. She vanished after a terrible accident. Everyone assumed she ran off. No trace, not even a goodbye. Elena didn't answer. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She tightened the ribbon on the bouquet, a little more than necessary. "I never said goodbye either," he continued. "But the truth is, I was in the hospital too, weeks. I didn't know she was alive, and when I finally woke up..." He trailed off. She looked up at him, finally meeting his eyes. "You didn't look for her." His face tightened. "By the time I thought it would only hurt more if I did. Maybe she didn't want to be found." She handed him the bouquet. Their fingers brushed. For a moment, the air shifted. He didn't flinch at the touch, didn't notice the thin ridges of scar tissue along her hand. Or maybe he did and said nothing. Adrian gave a small smile. "This is perfect." "I'm glad," Elena replied softly. He lingered, but the moment passed. He turned toward the door. "I'll see you next Tuesday," he asked. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course, Mr. Wolfe?" The bell chimed again as he left. Elena stood in the quiet that followed, bouquet trimmings scattered around her feet, her scarf damp with the heat of her breath. Her heart ached, not just from the memory, but from the way he looked at her like a stranger, holding the ghost of someone he once loved. She had lived 7 years building a world that kept her safe. But now, the man who shattered it had walked back in, without even knowing. And she didn't know what scared her more. That he didn't recognize her. Or that some part of her still wanted him to. Adrian came every Tuesday. Sometimes with his assistant, sometimes alone, but each time he lingered a little longer, his hand brushing the petals like they carried answers he didn't know he was seeking. Elena kept the same rhythm, smiled gently, offer suggestions, wrap each bouquet with precision and grace. But beneath her scarf and calm posture, her nerves tensed with every glance he gave her. Every time he said her name, Miss Reyes, it stirred something unsteady in her chest. He didn't recognize her, not truly. Maybe his memory buried the girl she used to be, before the flames, before her cheek bore the reminders of that night. Or maybe he did recognize her, just not in the way that mattered. Adrian leaned against the counter as she arranged another bouquet. "This place is like a cathedral," he murmured. "I come in, and everything outside fades." Elena kept her eyes on the flowers. "That's what flowers do. They offer peace." He studied her. "You always speak like a poet." She gave a small shrug. "Have you always lived here?" he asked casually. Her hands stilled. "Long enough. Not always?" She glanced up, then returned to trimming stems. "Some questions aren't worth asking." He didn't push. Instead, he picked up a small white tulip from the corner bucket. "This was my mother's favorite. She used to keep them by the piano. Said they softened the sound of grief." Elena's breath caught. She remembered. His mother's house. The way he played piano in the summer evenings while she read poetry beside him. She remembered him, promising her the world. Promising her the world. Flashbacks spilled through her like water breaking through glass. They were 17, maybe 18. He brought her to the cliffs, kissed her beneath fireflies, whispered dreams into the warm salt air. She believed him, believed in them. Even when his father demanded he leave for business school abroad, even when his letters stopped and all she had left was silence and soil. The same week the fire consumed her home, the newspapers read, Wolfe & Co. acquires Eastern Holdings. Adrian Wolfe named junior partner. He hadn't come back. Not when her mother died. Not when the fire took everything. Not even to see if she survived. Now here he was, eyes filled with peace he said he didn't understand, watching her arrange roses like they were still just strangers. At night, after he left, Elena stood in the back room with her best friend Marisol. You should tell him, Marisol said, arms crossed, eyes steady. He deserves to know what he walked away from, who he's talking to. Elena sat down at the work table, staring at the ribbon she'd been tying. It wouldn't change anything. Maybe not for him, Marisol said, softer now, but it might change something in you. Elena didn't respond. Instead, she reached for a fresh vase. She chose lilies white for mourning, and sprigs of rosemary for remembrance. Each placement was careful, deliberate, like a confession written in petals. When Adrian arrived the next Tuesday, he paused when he saw the bouquet already waiting at the counter. These weren't on the list, he said, puzzled. Elena replied, but I thought they were the right choice this week. He looked closer, tilting his head. Lilies and rosemary? She nodded. He frowned, thoughtful. Do you believe flowers can say what we can? Elena's eyes met his, quiet but steady. Some truths are too painful to say out loud. Adrian didn't answer right away. He stood there, bouquet in hand, studying her as though trying to place a memory just beyond reach. But Elena turned away, pretending to reorganize a shelf of gardenias that didn't need touching. When he left moments later, she didn't say goodbye, just nodded softly, heart hammering against ribs that still held too many unspoken truths. That night, she couldn't sleep. The bouquet she made him had been more than flowers. It had been a whisper, a bridge between then and now. But he hadn't crossed it. She told herself it was better this way. In the dark, she remembered the day of the fire. The way the smoke curled like fingers trying to pull her down. The way the chandelier cracked and fell. The heat that burned but never broke her. She'd saved 2 children, a caterer, an old man too stunned to run. But by the time the flames reached her, Adrian was already gone. She never blamed him, but she never forgot. The next day, the bell above the shop door jingled again. He returned, without his assistant. Miss Reyes, he greeted. I was hoping you might help me choose something different today. Her hands stilled mid-trim. Different how? I don't know, he admitted. Something that speaks without sounding too loud. Something that says, I'm sorry, even if I don't know why. She looked up at him then, really looked. And for a moment, it wasn't Adrian Wolfe, the heir to an empire, standing in her shop. It was the boy who once carved her name into driftwood and promised to return before the leaves changed. Her breath caught, and then she moved to the hydrangeas. Blue for understanding, she said softly, and peonies for regrets that still bloom. He listened like every word mattered. That's perfect. As she arranged the flowers, he watched her fingers. You know, he said slowly, your hands, they shake sometimes when I speak. She didn't answer. And your voice, it changes when I say my name. Her hands hesitated on the ribbon. Elena, his voice lowered. Have we met before? The moment was sharp as glass. She looked down, let the silence wrap around them like fog. Does it matter? He didn't know how to answer that. She handed him the bouquet without looking up. You said something about wanting to say sorry. Sometimes that's enough. Adrian left without another word. But something lingered in the air after he was gone. Not regret exactly, something softer, sadder. In the days that followed, Marisol noticed Elena wasn't sleeping. He doesn't remember you, she said gently one evening as they closed the shop. But you remember everything. That's a heavy thing to carry alone. Elena gave a tired smile. Memories are like flowers. Some bloom, some wilt, but they all mean something. That Sunday, she sat by the sea. Waves curled like secrets at her feet. She wrote his name in the sand, then watched the tide erase it. By Monday, she had made up her mind. She wouldn't hide from her story, but she wouldn't hand it away freely, either. If Adrian wanted to remember, truly remember, he'd have to find his way back, not just to her shop, but to the firelit truth that still burned quietly inside her. And when he did, maybe then she'd say her real name out loud again. The rain had returned, a soft drizzle clinging to the sleepy seaside town like a whisper. Elena was just closing the shutters of her floral shop when a screech of tires jolted her. Her heart jumped. Across the narrow street, a black SUV had skidded at the bend, its front fender wedged against a utility post. Without hesitation, Elena darted across the road, forgetting her scarf in the rush. As she reached the vehicle, the driver's side door creaked open and a familiar face slumped forward. Adrian. His forehead had a gash, bleeding lightly. His eyes fluttered. "Mr. Wolfe?" she breathed, her hands trembling. "Adrian, can you hear me?" He groaned in response, disoriented. "Come on," she whispered. "Let's get you inside." By the time she got him to the back room of her shop, the rain had soaked them both. Elena gently lowered him onto the old couch, grabbing towels and the first aid kit she kept under the sink. He was heavier than she remembered. Or maybe she was just lighter now, hollowed out from all the years. Adrian stirred as she dabbed his wound. "Where am I?" "In my shop." "You hit the post." His eyes blinked against the yellow glow of the backroom lamp. "You helped me?" She nodded, her voice tight. "You needed someone." His gaze wandered the room, pausing at the rows of dried lavender above the doorway, the soft hum of the radio, the scent of fresh roses lingering from today's arrangements. "I remember this smell," he murmured. "You've been here before?" she said softly, placing the gauze carefully. He nodded, but didn't press further. Then, as he shifted to sit up, something slipped from his wallet and fell to the floor with a soft flutter. Elena bent to pick it up and froze. It was an old photograph, torn at the edges, slightly faded from years of handling. But it was unmistakable, her. Before the fire, before the scarf, before her world changed. Her breath caught in her throat. "Where did you get this?" He asked his eyes what they did, opening their eyes again, hopeful at the sentience. Adrian blinked, then took the photo in his hand, almost reverently. "She saved me, in a fire, years ago, at the Santiago Gala." His voice dropped. There was smoke, screaming. "I couldn't find the way out. Then she was just there. She pulled me through. I tried to find her. But she vanished. I kept the photo from the news article in case." He looked up at Elena. She had a different face, but she changed everything. Elena's heart beat against her ribs like it wanted to speak, but her lips pressed closed. He didn't recognize her. Her fingers curled around the edge of the towel. "You never saw her again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He said quietly, "I think about her more than I should. She's part of a life I left behind." Elena's lashes lowered. "And if you did find her?" "I'd say thank you for saving me, for giving me another chance." She turned her face slightly, letting the shadows conceal more than her scarf ever could. That night, after Adrian had fallen into a light sleep on the couch, Elena called her best friend Maribel. "He had an accident," Elena said. "I brought him in. He's here." "Oh my God, does he know?" Elena replied, eyes on the sleeping man. "He doesn't recognize me, but he carries my photo from that night." A long pause, then Maribel whispered, "So what are you going to do?" Elena swallowed hard. "I'm going to make him remember, not just the fire, not just the pain. I want him to remember who I was, who I still am." She looked down at him again, before everything turned to ash. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the back room through lace curtains. Adrian blinked awake, his head pounding but the pain dulled by the soft scent of jasmine and chamomile in the air. He sat up slowly, still on the couch, a thin blanket tucked around him. He looked around, momentarily disoriented. The floral shop, the accident, the woman. Elena stepped in quietly, holding a mug of tea. Careful, you hit your head harder than you realized. Adrian accepted the cup, his fingers brushing hers briefly. Her touch was cool but steady. You stayed with me? She nodded, taking the seat across from him. You had a mild concussion. I didn't think sending you home alone was smart. He took a slow sip, eyes resting on her. You're kind. I'm not sure I deserve it. She looked down, hiding the flicker in her expression. Maybe we all deserve kindness, even if we've forgotten how to ask for it. Adrian watched her, sensing something deeper in her words. I've been here before, not just recently. Years ago, there was someone. Elena's hands stilled in her lap. She wore white the night of the gala. Her laugh used to echo in gardens, he continued. We were just kids, but it felt like everything. He searched Elena's face, trying to draw a connection, but the veil, a scarf, remained. And then, she asked gently. I left, Adrian admitted. My father was building his empire and I thought I had to choose power over love. I thought I could return after I proved myself, but by the time I came back, she was gone. They said she'd vanished after the fire. Elena nodded slowly. Fires do that. They don't just burn homes, they burn timelines, and faces, and names. He looked at her sharply, but she smiled faintly and stood. I should open the shop. As she moved toward the door, he called after her. That bouquet yesterday, lilies, rosemary, and cypress. She paused. I looked it up, he said. Lily for mourning, rosemary for remembrance, cypress for endings. Why that combination? Elena's voice was low. Sometimes we bury people before they've died. Sometimes we carry grief without graves. He stared at her back, silent. Days passed. Adrian continued to stop by, not to check on his head, but because he found himself pulled toward something unspoken in that shop. He watched Elena arrange flowers with a grace that hid old pain. He noticed how she spoke to the elderly customers with reverence and children with a soft joy that didn't feel forced. One evening, as the shop quieted, he lingered while she cleaned up. Tell me something real about you, he said gently. Anything. Elena hesitated. Then she handed him a small journal from behind the counter. He opened it to find pages of flower arrangements and their meanings. Notes written in the margins, some joyful, some heartbreaking. I used to teach this, she said, the language of flowers, before the fire, before I stopped being someone people recognized. Adrian turned to a page marked with her handwriting and a date from 7 years ago. The bouquet sketched there, identical to the ones she had made last week. You made this for the gala? He said. She nodded once. Then you were there. Elena met his gaze for the first time without turning away. I didn't just attend it, I helped people escape, and then I disappeared. Adrian's breath caught. I was her, she whispered. The girl in the photo, the one who pulled you out. Silence fell like petals on water. Adrian rose slowly and reached for her scarf. She flinched. He stopped. I don't need to see what's under it, he said softly, because I already see you. Elena's lips trembled. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe he meant it. Adrian returned to the flower shop later that week. No assistant, no security, just himself. The wind carried a light salt breeze from the ocean as he stepped inside. Elena stood behind the counter, arranging a bouquet of white tulips and lavender. Her eyes flicked up as the bell above the door jingled. Back again, she asked, her voice calm but cautious. I told myself it was for the flowers, Adrian said, brushing his hand over the petals of a peony, but I think it's something else. She didn't reply, only offered a faint smile. Adrian looked around the quiet shop, the faint scent of eucalyptus and roses curling in the air like memory. Would you like to see the greenhouse? Elena asked suddenly. It's just out back. I grow some of the flowers myself. He blinked, surprised by the invitation. "I'd love to." She led him through a narrow hallway into a sun-dripped glass greenhouse nestled behind the shop. It was quiet inside, warm with filtered light, plants climbing the walls and hanging from beams above. Jasmine vines curled around an old trellis. Delphiniums bloomed in orderly rows. "It's beautiful," he said softly, taking it all in. "It's the only place I don't hide," Elena said, touching a sprig of mint. "I can breathe here." Adrian walked slowly between the rows, glancing at the labeled tags beneath each plant. "You really know them all?" "Every stem, every meaning of—" She reached for a single red camellia and handed it to him. "What does this one mean?" "Love, but not the kind that comes easily." He looked at it for a long moment. "What about this?" He pointed to a cluster of forget-me's. She didn't speak right away. "Memory," she said at last. "The kind that doesn't let go, even when faces fade." He held her gaze, something stirring behind his eyes. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Do you believe flowers can speak for people? That they can say what we don't know how to?" She hesitated. "Sometimes I think they're the only ones that can." Adrian turned back toward the far corner, where an antique bench sat under a skylight. He paused there, touching the ivy crawling up the glass. "I left someone behind once," he said, voice low. "Years ago, I thought I'd come back to her, but life got in the way. By the time I was ready, she was gone." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she snipped a dead bloom. "Some people never get to come back." There was a long silence. Outside, waves crashed softly against the rocks beyond the alley. The air felt heavy with things unsaid. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the greenhouse door, knocking over a small ceramic pot. Soil spilled onto the stone floor, and from beneath it something metal sprang. A piece of paper, no bigger than a Coke bottle. Soiled with age, envy, humor, and a sinister urge. Adrian bent down and picked it up. His brows furrowed as he brushed off the dirt and pried it open. Inside sat a single cup-link silver, with a W engraved on the face. He froze. Elena stood motionless across from him, her fingers tightening around her shears. Adrian's voice was quiet, strained. "Where did you get this?" Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Then slowly, she walked toward him. "Night," she said. "The fire. I never told you everything." Adrian turned the coupling over in his palm, the metal now warm from his skin. His eyes searched Elena's face, trying to connect pieces he hadn't realized were missing. "This is mine. I lost it the night of the fire. But how did it end up here with you?" Elena didn't speak right away. Her fingers hovered just above her scarf, tugging it slightly before letting go. She walked over to one of the wooden shelves, where a vase of freshly cut daisies sat beside an old photo frame turned down. Her voice was hushed when she finally spoke. "Because I was there that night, at the gala." Adrian blinked. "You were—" She nodded. "I was helping in the kitchen, volunteering. I saw the first spark before the alarms ever went off. People panicked. I remember the screaming, the smoke choking every breath." She turned toward him, her eyes glistening. "I pulled people out, one by one, and then I found you, near the back hall, unconscious, bleeding." He took a step back, stunned. "You saved me?" "I dragged you outside, laid you on the grass, and when the paramedics came, I disappeared." Adrian's voice cracked. "Why?" Elena inhaled slowly. "Because no one knew me, and by the time it was over, I didn't want them to." He stared at her, heart pounding. "But I searched for that woman. I told the press I owed my life to her. I carried her photo, hoping one day I'd thank her." "You already had the photo," she whispered, "before the fire." His brows knitted. "What?" Elena moved to the bench, reached under it, and pulled out a dusty, leather-bound notebook. Inside was a sketch, drawn in ink with soft lines and a gentle hand. A woman standing among wildflowers. "You gave this to me, the summer we were 16. I worked at your grandfather's orchard. We spent those evenings under the fig trees, talking about dreams we thought we'd chase together." His breath caught. "Elena?" Her scarf slipped just slightly as she met his eyes full on. "I didn't think you'd remember me." A long silence stretched between them as Adrian stepped forward, slowly, like approaching a miracle he wasn't sure he deserved. "I remember. You gave me a flower crown on your birthday. You called it a crown for someone brave." She laughed softly, the sound trembling. "I needed it more than you did." "I left that summer," he said, voice tight. "Promised I'd write. I didn't. My family pulled me back into the business. Everything moved so fast." "You were gone," she replied. "Then came the fire, and then everything else." He looked at her, really looked, through the veil of time, through the years of guilt and silence. "I never forgot your eyes." Elena swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to recognize me. Not like this." "But now I do," Adrian said, "and I'm sorry it took a lost cufflink and a greenhouse to bring me back." Tears slid down Elena's cheek. "You were always supposed to come back. But I stopped waiting." "And I never stopped searching," he replied. His silence hung between them again, this time full of understanding. He reached out, slowly brushing his thumb along the edge of the scarf. "You don't have to hide anymore. Not from me." Elena didn't pull away. And for the first time in 7 years, the wound between them finally began to close. The ballroom glittered that night, dressed in crystal chandeliers and laughter. Elena Reyes, in a navy satin gown with a single orchid tucked behind her ear, stood at the edge of the dance floor, heart racing. It was the last gala her family would ever host, though none of them knew it yet. Adrian Wolfe found her in the corner, away from the politicians and wealthy guests who floated from handshakes to champagne. He reached for her hand without a word and led her to the floor. She didn't need to ask questions. She had memorized the way his eyes darkened with worry. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the string quartet. "I have to?" he whispered into her hair. "My father's health is declining. If I don't prove I can run the company now, they'll never take me seriously." "I don't care if they take you seriously. I care that you're here." He cupped her face gently. "Elena, I will come back, when I've built something worth sharing, when I can give you more than whispered promises in hidden corners." She searched his eyes, memorizing the flecks of amber and hurt, the trembling hope buried in his voice. She wanted to believe him. She needed to. Outside, wind slapped the glass windows. Thunder rumbled over the sea. Hours later, after he kissed her cheek and slipped away quietly, the fire began. A scream echoed from the second-floor hallway. Smoke billowed near the staircase. The power flickered, plunging the chandeliers into darkness. Elena didn't think she just ran. A mother stood paralyzed at the edge of the flames, sobbing. A toddler was trapped in the nursery. Without waiting, Elena tied part of her gown over her face, dove into the smoke and disappeared. Heat seared her skin as she lifted the child into her arms. She felt her right cheek burn before she heard the beam crack above her. The ceiling gave way. It dropped. She awoke days later in a hospital bed, her mother weeping beside her, half of her face bandaged. Adrian never came. She wrote to him once. The letter returned unopened, no forwarding address, no word. He had vanished. Back in the present, Adrian stood in the greenhouse's doorway, older now, broader shoulders beneath a tailored coat, and guilt clouding his eyes. Elena swallowed hard and reached for the edge of her silk scarf. Slowly, she unwrapped it. The light caught the ridged skin stretching across her cheek, down her neck. She let him see all of it. She said quietly, "Is what your goodbye left me with." Adrian's breath hitched. His knees buckled, and he knelt on the greenhouse floor as if gravity itself had failed him. His eyes never left hers, but they were glistening now, red-rimmed and unblinking. "Can't you the safe?" he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know you stayed. I didn't know you went back in." "I was supposed to meet you," she whispered, blinking fast, "but someone needed saving, and then I needed saving, and you were gone." He shook his head, crushed by the weight of her words. "You don't have to forgive me, but please, don't shut me out. Let me stay." Elena stood still, wind rattling the greenhouse glass. She looked at the man on the floor, no longer the boy who had made promises in candlelight. "Stay," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "But not as who you were. As who you are now." Adrian remained on his knees, stunned by her words. Slowly he stood, brushing dirt from his slacks, but his gaze stayed fixed on her. The veil of memory had finally lifted, and in its place stood a woman who had survived hell without him, a woman he thought he had lost and never truly deserved. "I don't know what kind of man I am now," he said softly, "but I know who I want to be, and that man doesn't walk away again." Elena turned toward the shelves of blooming snapdragons, as if the flowers could shield her from the storm churning in her chest. "It's been 7 years. People don't come back after 7 years and pick up where they left off." "I know," he admitted, "and I'm not asking to. I'm just asking to be allowed into whatever this is now, even if it's just friendship." She glanced at him, quiet for a moment. "You really didn't recognize me." "I knew your voice," he said, stepping closer. "But your face, I carried your photo for years, but I never thought the woman in the flower shop, the woman I kept returning to." Her hand brushed the scarred side of her cheek instinctively. "You were always the strongest person I knew, Elena," he said, voice low. "That night didn't change that. It just made it more visible." Silence stretched between them again. Not awkward, just full. She turned to the side table and picked up a small bouquet she had made that morning. Lavender, chamomile, and bleeding hearts. She handed it to him wordlessly. "What does this mean?" he asked. Her voice was soft, healing, peace, and sorrow that lingers. He studied the arrangement with reverence. "Then, I'll take it, and carry it until something blooms in its place." Later that evening, as twilight softened the sky, Adrian sat in the corner of the shop, sipping tea, while Elena watered the hanging orchids. Neither of them spoke of the past anymore. For now, it was enough to breathe in the same air, share the same silence. A knock on the shop door startled them both. Elena opened it to find her best friend Sophia, holding a thick envelope. "You left this at my place." Adrian watched as Elena opened the envelope and pulled out a folded newspaper. An old article with a grainy photo of the two of them at the gala, years ago. She hadn't known she still had it. She looked up at Adrian. "Do you regret leaving?" His answer was immediate. "Only every day since." She let the paper slide back into the envelope. "Then maybe you can help me burn it." He blinked. "Burn it?" She nodded, eyes steady. "Let's let it go. Start something new." They stepped outside into the evening breeze. In a metal tin, she placed the envelope and struck a match. The fire caught quickly, crackling, consuming the past page by page. Adrian stood behind her, watching her face, not the flames, the way the wind tugged gently at her scarf, the way the firelight flickered in her dark eyes. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" she asked. "For surviving. For still being here." Elena looked at him, her voice steady. "Then be here too." He didn't promise this time. He didn't have to. They stood shoulder to shoulder as ash danced into the sky. The scent of damp earth and blooming lavender filled the community garden as Adrian gently knelt to trim a row of wild herbs. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, sweat beading along his forehead, but for the first time in years, he looked at peace. Elena stood a few steps away, arms folded loosely, watching. She hadn't planned to come by, but something, curiosity perhaps, had drawn her here. Children from the neighborhood ran between raised beds, laughing, and older volunteers worked nearby, occasionally casting glances toward the new helper with expensive shoes now caked in dirt. Adrian didn't seem to notice. He was too busy listening to Mrs. Vega, the elderly woman teaching him how to prune basil without bruising it. Elena's lips twitched in something close to a smile. Later, as the sun dipped low, she wandered past again and found him alone, scrubbing grime off his hands at the rain barrel. His smile, when he saw her, wasn't polished. It was human. "Didn't expect you here," he said. "I didn't expect you here either," she replied, voice even. He shrugged. I wanted to start fixing things. Somewhere. She didn't reply, just nodded slowly, and left. Days passed, whispers of change traveled through the town. Adrian Wolfe, the cold corporate heir, was now rebuilding the burnt west wing of the old orphanage. The same orphanage Elena once supported before it caught fire in a storm years ago. This time it would be rebuilt in her name. Olympus didn't find out until she passed by the site one evening. The skeletal frame of the new wing was already up, and volunteers moved around like a small army. Young, old, families, students. She paused at the newly painted mural along the side wall. It was breathtaking. A swirl of lilies and rosemary climbed across the bricks, symbols of mourning and memory, hope and healing. And nestled at the center was a portrait of a woman with a silk scarf draped across her cheek, her eyes fierce but kind, her knees nearly buckled. "Elena?" Adrian's voice came from behind her. She turned, but he didn't move closer. His hands were stained with paint. "Did you do this?" she whispered. "I had help." He looked down. I didn't know how else to say it. Silence stretched between them. Elena looked back at the mural. She finally spoke. "You used to hate flowers." He chuckled softly. "I used to hate a lot of things I didn't understand." That night, she did something unexpected. She invited him to dinner. The little cottage glowed with warmth as candlelight flickered across the wooden table. Adrian looked out of place at first, sitting beneath shelves lined with vintage vases and pressed flower frames, but the awkwardness faded quickly. They talked about nothing, about everything. Over dessert, a quiet settled over them. Elena lifted her glass, but didn't drink. "I used to dream of revenge," she said softly, "of making you feel the pain I felt when you didn't come back." Adrian's face tightened. "But then," she continued, "you started showing up. Not just here," she gestured to the shop, the town, the garden, "but in ways that mattered." He leaned forward, voice low. "I don't want to close this chapter. I want to write a new one, with you." Her throat tightened. She looked away, then back at him. "You broke my heart." "I know," he said, "and I will never forgive myself for that. But if there's even a single corner of your heart left, let me be the one to piece it back together." The silence that followed his words was not heavy. It was delicate, like the space between breaths. Elena looked at Adrian. Not the man he had been, but the one sitting across from her now. His shoulders weren't as square, his confidence not as sharp. He was softer, more human. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she rose and walked toward a shelf near the window. She returned with a wooden box, faded at the edges, its clasp worn from time. She placed it between them and opened it. Inside were dried blooms, pressed flat between soft paper, each one labeled in her neat, curling handwriting. "Memories in petals." "This was how I stayed sane," she said. "After the fire, after you." He reached out slowly, picking up a dried rose with a broken stem. His voice was gentle. "What does this one mean?" She took it from him, fingertips brushing his. "It means hope, even when the stem braked." He swallowed hard. They sat in that moment, wrapped in quiet understanding, the kind that only comes after wounds have been exposed, stitched, and aired. A week later, Adrian returned to the greenhouse, not to visit, but to help. He watered seedlings, learned to graft branches, even brought his own gloves. The locals began calling him the man who traded suits for soil. Elena would watch from the doorway, arms folded, lips pressed into something close to a smile. She didn't rush, she didn't run, but she also didn't shut the door. And then, one evening, she surprised him. He was scrubbing pots when she walked over with 2 thermoses of tea. "You missed a spot," she teased, nodding to the dirt on his chin. He laughed, wiping it with his wrist. "I thought I looked distinguished." She handed him a cup and sipped hers. "You're not bad at this." He raised an eyebrow. She said, "Stain." He didn't answer right away, but she saw something shift in his expression, something quiet and grateful. Later, as they sat on a bench watching the stars, Adrian turned to her. "Do you believe people can change?" Elena didn't look at him. She looked at her hands, still bearing faint scars. I think pain changes people, but so does love. He reached over, his hand resting gently atop hers. Helen, he said, voice trembling slightly. I never came back because I didn't think I was worthy. You deserved someone stronger, someone who wouldn't leave. She looked at him then, really looked. Maybe I did, but I also needed to fall, to learn how to rise again. Adrian leaned in, not for a kiss, not for anything grand, but simply to rest his forehead against hers. I can't undo the night I left, he whispered. But I can be here for every night that follows. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she let them fall. For once, she didn't hide them. She didn't hide at all. I'm not asking for forever, he said, just for the chance to begin again. She nodded slowly, leaning back just enough to meet his gaze. Then start, she said. Right here, in the dirt, with me. He smiled, and this time, it wasn't laced with regret. It was full, real, and new. That night, as she returned to her cottage and placed a fresh lily in the vase by her bedside, Elena felt something bloom quietly inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. And just like that, the whispers of redemption grew louder. In truth, watered by time, and blooming at last under a love that had learned how to stay. The morning sun poured gently into the floral shop, casting golden light across the counter where Elena Reyes stood, her fingers trembling around a delicate stem of white peony. The air was thick with the scent of roses and freesia, but the heaviness in her chest overpowered even the strongest bloom. She was preparing a bouquet for a bride she barely knew, a rise of form and myrtle for love and marriage, and lily of the valley for hope. It should have been routine, but her eyes stung. She paused, one hand brushing the silk scarf around her cheek, as if shielding more than just the scar beneath it. The bouquet blurred. A tear slipped past her lashes before she could stop it, landing silently on the peony. A bell above the door jingled softly. Elena. Adrian's voice filled the quiet like a gentle storm. He stepped inside, holding something in his hands, a small black box, his fingers curled tightly around it. His eyes immediately found hers, and whatever he saw on her face made his jaw tighten with emotion. She quickly turned, trying to regain composure. I wasn't expecting you today. I know, he said, but I couldn't wait. He stepped closer, slowly, giving her space. She didn't move, but her hands fidgeted with the ribbon on the bouquet. He said again, softer now. This morning, I walked past that old mural at the garden. The one the kids painted of you, and I thought, they see you. Not as someone broken, but someone who made beauty from pain. She looked up, startled. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small box. Then he opened it. Inside sat a single ring. No diamonds, no grandeur, just a simple gold band. Wrapped around it was a thin strip of silk. Ivy, delicate and quivering, despoiled itself of the scarf she always wore. Elena's breath caught in her throat. I don't come with promises of fairy tales, Adrian said, voice steady but thick with feeling. I know I broke something precious between us once. I know I can't erase what you went through, but I've spent every day since I found you again learning what love really is. Her eyes filled again, the bouquet in her hand trembled. He knelt. The motion was slow, reverent. Elena Reyes, he said, you were never forgotten. Even when I was lost, even when I didn't know how to find my way back, you lived in the part of me that still believed in better days. You don't need saving, you never did, but I do. And I need to show you what love looks like when it stays. Her lips parted, the words forming in her chest but unable to rise past the ache. He looked up at her, his eyes shimmering. Will you let me love you, sir? And all. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet ticking of the clock behind the register. She slowly bent down, set the bouquet gently beside him, and removed the scarf from her cheek. The burn scars shimmered in the sunlight like silver threads. I wore this, she whispered, to keep the world from seeing what was left of me. But you You looked right through it." She reached out, touching the ring with the tip of her finger. "Thought I was ruined," she said, voice shaking. "But I'm not. I'm blooming again." Adrian rose slowly, his breath caught between hope and awe, as Elena gently took the ring from the box. Her fingers brushed the silk wrap, the soft fabric echoing the one that had hidden her pain for years. But now, it held something else. Trust. A symbol of healing. She looked at him, eyes shimmering. "Yes," she whispered, "because I'm not broken, just blooming again." His exhale was shaky, like he'd been holding it since the night he lost her. He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. Not just the size, but the gesture, no gesture of gravity. Perfect, quiet, honest, unadorned, just like her love. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full, rich, like soil ready for new roots. Outside, the world carried on. Cars passed, a seagull cried somewhere near the shore, and the wind fluttered through the open window. But inside the shop, time had softened. It was just the two of them and 1,000 blossoms bearing witness. Elena reached for the bouquet she had started earlier. The ribbon had loosened slightly, and she tied it tighter, her hands steadier now. She added one final flower, a yellow tulip for new beginnings, and smiled at the arrangement. "I made this for someone else," she said, "but I think it was really for me." He nodded. "Then let it be our beginning too." That night, after the shop closed, they didn't go anywhere extravagant. Instead, they walked down to the beach where they once spent long summer nights years ago, before the fire, before the scars, before the silence. They sat on the cool sand, shoes off, waves licking at their feet. The moon cast silver across the water, and Elena leaned her head on Adrian's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, and for the first time in years, her body didn't flinch from being seen, from being held. "You were always the strongest person I knew," he murmured. "I was just trying to survive," she replied. "And now," he asked, turning to her gently. "I want to live." He pressed a kiss to her temple, and she closed her eyes. Later, he took her hand again and led her up the path behind the dunes, where he'd parked his car. But instead of heading home, they stopped by the orphanage garden. The mural was lit by small solar lights, her face surrounded by painted lilies, rosemary, and daffodils. "I helped paint this," he admitted, "but the kids chose the flowers." She stared at the image of herself. Not as she once was, not as the girl before the fire, but as the woman who rose. "I don't deserve this," she said quietly. "You deserve more," he answered. "This is just the start." She turned to him, tears pooling again, not from sadness but from release. "Then let's write the rest. Together." He didn't need to reply. He just kissed her under the glow of the mural with the scent of blossoms and wet earth in the air. The bouquet still rested in the shop's window the next morning, its petals open, as if waiting for someone to believe in second chances. The scent of fresh wildflowers drifted softly through the glass-tangled greenhouse, where rows of blossoms bloomed in every shade of the sunset. Roses, jasmine, lavender, and rosemary filled the air with warmth and grace. Guests gathered in quiet admiration, their chairs set in curved rows between the planters. The air held the hush of reverence, as if even nature had paused to bear witness. Elena Reyes stood at the threshold of her greenhouse, bathed in natural golden light. For the first time in years, she wore no scarf over her cheek. The scar that had once dictated her every move now shimmered like a badge of resilience. Her dress was simple and cream-colored, sewn with pieces of lace saved by her late mother. In her hands, she held a bouquet not unlike the one she had once made to speak the words she couldn't. Lilies for grief, rosemary for memory, white camellias for love unspoken but enduring. Adrian Wolfe stood at the front, his suit tailored, his boutonniere pinned carefully to his lapel. Rosemary and white camellias, her signature. His fingers trembled, but not from fear. It was awe. Elena stepped forward, every guest rose. No music played, but no one missed it. Elena's quiet confidence was symphony enough. Each step she took echoed with meaning. She was not walking toward redemption. She had already claimed it. She walked toward love, toward peace, toward a future she had once buried under ash. When she reached Adrian, his eyes were glassy. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered, voice breaking. Her smile trembled as she answered, "You always said I bloomed best in the sunlight." The officiant began to speak, but Elena hardly heard the words. Her world had narrowed to the man in front of her, the smell of blossoms, and the weight of all she'd survived to get here. They exchanged vows beneath an arch of white roses and wild ivy. Adrian's voice shook as he said, "I once left searching for a future. I didn't realize you were already mine. I vow to never leave again." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks as she replied, "I thought love meant perfection. But I've learned that love, real love, is what grows in imperfect soil. You're my roots now." When they kissed, it wasn't dramatic or performative. It was tender, steady, the kind of kiss that carried the full weight of time, pain, forgiveness, and new beginnings. At the reception, strings of lights twinkled above the long wooden tables set under the open greenhouse ceiling. Glass jars filled with hand-tied flower arrangements dotted each surface. Laughter bubbled from the guests as children chased petals that had been tossed like confetti. Elena and Adrian moved together effortlessly, greeting each table, their hands never far apart. As dusk turned the sky lavender, Adrian pulled Elena aside. They stood near her original work table, the one still stained with soil and scattered with scissors and ribbon. From his pocket, Adrian pulled out a small card with a floral sketch she had once given him during her first delivery. Beneath the drawing, he had written something new. Angularly, "You once said flowers speak truths," he said. "What do these say?" He pointed to the boutonniere on his chest, rosemary and white camellias again. Elena's smile was soft, radiant. "They say every ending has roots for a beginning." They turned then, stepping outside the greenhouse and onto the front path, where something new awaited them. The old wooden sign that once simply read, "Reyes Florals," had been replaced. Adrian gestured toward it. "You ready?" Elena nodded. Together, they unveiled it. Carved in smooth walnut, the new sign read, "A as in Wolfe Floral, grown through fire." Her name, his name, one life, one story. One love that had survived the ashes. The sun had dipped low, casting amber light across the greenhouse and the little street in front of it. The guests began to trickle out, but no one really wanted to leave. There was something about the atmosphere, a peace, a wholeness that made the moment feel suspended in time. Elena stood beside Adrian, both of them quietly admiring the new sign that bore their joined names. A small pair of feet padded across the stone path. A little girl, no older than 6, with freckles dusted across her nose, stopped in front of the flower shop. She stared up at the sign, her brows furrowed in thought. "Yes, there's fire in the flowers," she asked curiously, pointing to the carved flames rising from the bouquet etched below the shop's name. Elena crouched down, her wedding gown folding gently around her. She reached for a tiny rosemary sprig tucked behind the girl's ear, brushing her cheek with a smile. "Because fire doesn't just destroy," she said softly. "It reveals what's meant to bloom." The girl's eyes lit up, and she nodded like she understood more than her years could hold. Then she skipped away, petals crunching underfoot, back toward the sound of music and laughter. Adrian reached for Elena's hand. "You said that once," he murmured, "back when I didn't know how much I'd lost." Elena leaned into him. "And now? I know I didn't just find you again. I found myself in the ashes." They stepped back into the greenhouse, now illuminated by candlelight and soft golden bulbs strung along the beams. Their closest friends remained, Elena's best friend, who had stood beside her through silence and pain, and Adrian's sister, who had flown across the ocean to finally meet the woman he had whispered about for years. At the center of the room stood a table covered in photographs, some new, others old. There was a black and white picture of a younger Elena, her hair long and wild, laughing under a spray of roses. And beside it, a photo of Adrian at a boardroom table, his eyes distant, lonely. But at the center, framed in gold, was their newest picture, the wedding portrait. Adrian standing tall with his boutonniere, Elena beside him with her scar uncovered and her smile unshaken. Behind them, rows of wildflowers. Around them, family, chosen, and blood. It wasn't just a wedding photo, it was a statement, a memory, a truth. Elena turned to the small wall near the shop's counter. There, years ago, she had painted a faded quote in watercolor, nearly erased by time. She now knelt, dipped a brush into golden ink, and traced new words beneath the old. "What was once hidden in ash now blooms in light," she read aloud. Adrian crouched beside her. "That one's ours, isn't it?" Elena nodded. "Every line we write now will..." Later that night, when the last guest had departed and the greenhouse had returned to its gentle stillness, Adrian wrapped a shawl around Elena's shoulders. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the heartbeat she'd once thought she'd never hear again. "I never imagined this," she whispered. "You didn't need to," Adrian said. "You lived it. You survived it. And now we grow it." Outside, the wind stirred the flowers. The flames carved into the sign flickered beneath the lantern light. The town slept, unaware that inside the quiet greenhouse on the hill, two souls who had burned and broken were now finally whole. And as Elena Reyes, no longer hidden, no longer afraid, locked the front door of the shop bearing her name and his, she knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, the kind with roots deep enough to weather anything.